Hi, my name's Paul Grogan and welcome to my tutorial video for Import-Export, designed and published by Jordan Draper, who kindly sponsored this video. In Import-Export, you and up to 5 other players take on the role of a shipping expert at a time of global economic growth. It is a role selection game that has a passive and active economy driven by player decisions. Multi-use cards are a big part of the game. You will use your cards to assign contracts to your ships, load containers onto a ship in your harbour in order to meet the requirements of the contract, and when a contract is complete, the ship sails to the open sea. And the contract becomes a special power that you have for the rest of the game. You can begin an auction for containers on ships at sea, and the highest bidder takes 2 cards from that ship. You can sell cards to the supply island for money, or take cards from the supply island as a member of your crew, which allows you to take more powerful actions later in the game. And you can even pirate containers from another ship at sea and claim them for yourself. Throughout the game you will earn credits by fulfilling contracts and selling goods. At the end of the game, each collected good is worth credits, and you gain a bonus if you have collected at least one of each type. Also, the player who collected the most goods of each type gets a bonus, but beware, if you collected the most illegal goods, you must pay a fine. And the player with the most credits at the end of the game is declared the winner. This video has been created using the retail version of the definitive edition of the game. I'll start by teaching you the rules of the base game, and then I'll cover the rules for the expansions and the alternative ways to play at the end of the video. Place the supply island in the middle of the play area. The area around the island is the open sea. For your first game, I recommend using only the 100 cards from the base game. Leave the cards from the expansions in the box for now. You can introduce those cards once you're familiar with the base game. Shuffle the commodity cards that you're using all together and place them face down near the supply island. This is the draw deck. Reveal a number of these cards equal to the number of players in the game and place them on the supply island face up. If playing with fewer than 6 players, return the grey harbour card and ships to the box. Then give each player one of the remaining harbour cards at random. Each player takes the 2 ships and a reference card that match their harbour. Place your harbour in front of you and one of your ships just behind it. Place your other ship in the open sea. For each ship in the open sea, reveal 4 cards from the draw deck and place them below the ship. This represents the containers on that ship. Each player starts the game with 10 credits. This can either be 5 of the small tokens, which represent 2 credits each, or 1 large token, which represents 10 credits. The colour doesn't matter. If playing with 6 players, the player with the grey harbour gets an additional 4 credits. Place the remaining credits nearby as a bank. Each player draws 5 cards from the draw deck as their starting hand. Cards in hand should be kept secret from the other players. Choose a starting player at random and then give them the first player marker. With setup complete, you're now ready to play the game. Import-Export is played over a series of turns. The player whose turn it is the leading player and must choose to either draw cards or play a card and perform an action. If they perform an action, other players can follow that action by playing a matching action card from their hand, or they can draw cards instead. After everyone has performed their actions, the next player in clockwise order becomes the new leading player. There are 3 ways the game can end. If a player has 50 or more physical credits, if there are no more cards in the draw deck and discard pile, or if a special condition from a fulfilled contract is met. You finish the current turn and then proceed to final scoring. On your turn, you must either draw cards or play a card. Drawing cards is the simple bit. You draw new cards from the deck until you have 5 cards in hand. Or, if you already have 5 or more cards in hand, you draw 1 card. If the draw deck is ever empty, shuffle the discard pile to form a new draw deck. And that's it. If you draw cards, your turn is then over and it's the next player's turn. If, however, you decide to play a card instead, then this is a bit more involved. First, choose a card from your hand to play and place it on your harbour. The action printed on the left side of the card is the action that you will perform. Then, you declare the number of times that you will perform that action. You must declare at least 1 action for the card you played, but if you have any crew that match the declared action, you may declare additional actions for each matching crew. For example, here you have 2 matching crew cards, so you could declare that you are doing the load action once, twice, or even 3 times. After declaring your action and how many times you'll perform it, other players in clockwise order announce if they will follow or draw. To follow, another player must play a card with a matching action from their hand to their harbour. And then that player also declares how many times they will perform the action, which again is 1 for the card, and then additional optional ones for matching crew cards. Or, instead of following, another player could draw. This works in the same way as when the leading player draws, they draw up to a hand of 5 cards, or if already at 5 cards, they just draw one more. However, even if they draw, they still get to declare that they are performing the action if they have any matching crew cards, up to once for each matching crew. The important thing is that at this point, players are just declaring their actions, not actually performing any. Before going any further, I need to tell you about a super important rule, which is the 2-card wild rule. When you are declaring an action as either the leading player or following as another player, if you do not have a card in hand of the action you want, you can use 2 cards of the same colour together as if they were the colour of the card that you want. Now, let me give you a full example of how declaring actions works. Player 1 plays a load card from their hand to their harbour. They also have 1 matching crew, so they declare that they are performing the load action twice. They could have just chosen once. Player 2 does not have a load card in hand and therefore chooses to draw. They currently have 3 cards in hand, so they draw 2 cards. They also do not have any matching crew, so they cannot perform the action. Player 3 wants to follow and does so by playing a load card from hand. They also have 1 matching crew, so they could declare that they are performing the action once or twice. Player 4 thinks about following, and although they do not have a load card in hand, they do have 2 pirate cards, which can be used together as a load card. They choose not to follow and instead draw. They already have 5 cards in hand, so they draw 1 card. But because they have 2 matching crew, they can still declare that they are performing the action once or twice. After all players have declared how many times they will perform the action, each player in order, starting with the leading player and going clockwise, performs those actions. I'll explain the actions themselves in a later chapter. Once all players have finished, all cards played to the harbour this turn are placed on the discard pile. Only the topmost card of the discard pile should be visible. And then the first player marker is passed to the next player clockwise. Before explaining the actions, there are a couple of important things to mention. During the game, you will be adding cards to the left side of your harbour as crew and to the right side as goods. You begin the game with 1 completed contract, as depicted here, and you will be tucking completed contracts into the top of your harbour to increase that number. The maximum number of crew you can have is equal to the number of fulfilled contracts, and the maximum number of goods you can have is equal to twice the number of fulfilled contracts. I'll now go through the 5 available actions one by one. Each time you perform the supply action, you have 2 options. Either sell a card from your hand by placing it on the supply island and taking 4 credits. If you are performing this action more than once in a turn, you can only choose this option once. Your other option is to take a card from the supply island and add it to your crew. This option can be performed multiple times, and it is allowed to take a card that you just sold to the island. Note that if you are already at your crew limit, you can still take a card from the island, but then you discard it. You are not allowed to replace the crew that you already have. And if you're wondering why you would want to perform this action and then just discard a card without taking it, well, consider that another player might really want that card. Each time you perform the contract action, choose a card in your hand and place it underneath a ship in your harbour. Make sure that the load requirement of the contract is visible. A ship can have multiple contracts, as long as the total load requirement isn't greater than 6. Before you place a contract though, you need to check if you meet its tier level requirement, as shown by the number and colour of filled in circles in the top right of the card. Each good in your harbour counts as having 1 tier level of its matching type, and your harbour itself counts as 1 tier level in its colour. For example, here you have tier level 1 in agriculture and tier level 2 in illegal goods, 1 from the card and 1 because you have the red harbour. This means that you could contract fake money, because that only requires tier level 1 in illegal goods. You could also contract televisions, because that has no tier level requirement. But you could not contract Hawaiian salt, because that requires tier 2 in agriculture and you only have tier 1. Note that some cards from the expansions have tier level requirements depicting more than 1 colour. And also note that in a 6-player game, the grey harbour does not match the colour of any of the goods, which is why its owner started the game with additional credits. I said earlier that you can play 1 card as a contract for each time you perform this action, but there is something else that you can do with additional contract actions if you don't meet the tier level requirement. Each contract action that you forego counts as 1 temporary tier level for placing a contract. For example, you want to place a nice suits contract on your ship. To do this requires level 3 in luxury, but you only have level 1. If you only had 1 or 2 contract actions, you could not do this. However, since you have 2 contract crew and you are the leading player, you get to perform the action 3 times, so you could use your second and third actions to meet the missing tier requirements. Also note that at any time when you are the leading player, you can discard any number of unfulfilled contracts from your ships, placing them on the discard pile. Any containers on the ship remain there. You would probably only want to do this if you drew a better contract and wanted to replace the previous one. Each time you perform the load action, choose a card in your hand and place it behind a ship in your harbour. The ship must need the container. In other words, there must be an unmet load requirement on a contract on the ship. So here, for example, this ship has 2 contracts and requires technology and illegal containers. So only those 2 types can be loaded. And if there are already 2 technology containers on the ship, then no more of that type can be loaded. As soon as the correct number and type of containers have been loaded onto a ship to meet the load requirement of all contracts, those contracts are immediately fulfilled. When this happens, you first receive credits from the bank based on the number of containers on the ship. This is shown on your reference card. Then you tuck the contracts into the top of your harbour. Each contract has a special power which is summarised on the card and explained in more detail in the rulebook. If the contract has an immediate power, then you resolve it now. Then move the ship along with its containers into the open sea. And finally, reveal 1 card from the draw deck and place it on the supply island. Before I explain the import action in detail, I need to cover how multiple import actions work. Normally, after players have declared how many actions they will perform, they then each carry them actions out in order. Well, that's not the case with the import action. Instead, there are a number of bidding rounds equal to the highest number of actions declared by any player. For example, if red declares 2 import actions, blue declares 1, and green declares 3, then there are 3 bidding rounds. The number of actions that each player declares is how many of those bidding rounds they take part in. So back to the previous example, all 3 players take part in bidding round 1. But in bidding round 2, only red and green take part because blue only declared 1 action. And in bidding round 3, only green takes part because they were the only player to declare 3 actions. In each bidding round, the lead player always chooses which ship will be bid on, even if they are not taking part in the actual bidding for that round. All players involved in the bid place any amount of credits into their hands secretly, and it is allowed to bid nothing. Once everyone has bid, all bids are revealed and the player who bid the most pays those credits to the bank. In case of a tie, the leading player chooses who wins the bid from among the tied players. The winner of the bid takes any 2 cards from the ship. You may choose to place one of those cards as crew, and then all other cards are stored as goods. Remember that you are limited to the number of crew and goods cards. If cards were taken from a ship by someone other than the owner of the ship's owner gains 2 credits from the bank. If the ship now has no cards on it, it immediately returns to its owner's harbour. Each time you perform the pirate action, take either a container on any ship in the open sea or a card on the supply island and load it onto one of the ships in your harbour. Like with the load action, there must be an unmet matching load requirement on the ship. If you are unable to load it, you can still take the card, but then must discard it instead. And remember that the leading player performs all of their actions first, followed by the other players in clockwise order, so be careful who you steal from. If the last container is removed from a ship at sea from pirating, that ship is immediately returned to its owner's harbour. It can happen that pirating a container fulfills a contract. In this case, follow the normal rules for fulfilling contracts, but note that the ship is sent to the sea before more pirate actions are performed, and therefore it's a fair target for any remaining pirate actions this turn. Every card in the game has a unique name and power. These powers often override the standard rules of the game. There are 3 main types of powers, ones with a grey 1 in a circle, ones with a black arrow in a circle, and ones with no symbol at all. It's these ones that I'll explain first. The power on a contract with no symbol is in effect only after you have fulfilled it, and from that point on, the power is always in effect. The more contracts you fulfill, the more powers you have. Contracts with the grey 1 in a circle have a one-off effect that resolves immediately upon fulfilling the contract. The card is still added to your harbour but has no further powers. Contracts with the black arrow in a circle are very special. They can be used at any time, some of them even when the card is in your hand. If you are allowed to play the card from your hand, you must still meet the tier level requirement as normal. For more details on all of the powers, check the back of the rulebook or the additional sheets. The game ends if any of the following conditions are met. A player has 50 or more physical credits, or there are no more cards remaining in the draw deck and discard pile, or a special condition from a fulfilled contract is met. You play until the end of the turn, and then the game ends and it's time for final scoring. For your ships in the harbour, you gain 2 credits for every container loaded onto them where the contracts haven't yet been fulfilled. Containers on ships at sea are worth nothing. For each good you have, you gain 1 credit, apart from illegal goods, which get you 2 credits each. You gain 10 credits if you have at least 1 good of each type. Then, check to see which players have the most of each type of good. The player who has the most agriculture goods gains 6 credits, the player who has the most technology goods gains 6 credits, and the player who has the most consumer goods gains 6 credits. The player who has the most illegal goods loses 6 credits as they get arrested and have to pay excessive lawyers' fees. And finally, the player who has the most luxury goods gains 8 credits. In case of a tie for the most goods, divide the payout between all tied players and round up. And the player with the most credits is declared the winner. In case of a tie, all tied players share the victory. The normal rules of the game use the cards as containers and the small tokens to represent credits. However, there are some alternative ways to play the game which help save space. First, whenever a card would be loaded as a container onto a ship, instead of placing the card below the ship, discard it and take a container of the matching colour from the supply and place that on the ship instead. When you perform the import action, take the containers from the ship, return them to the supply, and then look through the discard pile one at a time until you find a card matching the colour of the container you took. Take that card and place it as either crew or goods as normal. Place the rest of the cards back on top of the discard pile in the same order. You could even go one step further and use the tokens for your crew and goods. In this case, any time you would place a card as a crew or good, discard it and place a matching token instead. And finally, to save even more space, you can play with the small harbour cards instead of the larger ones. The Capital expansion adds another action and new contracts that have different rules for their tier level requirements. During setup, the grey harbour and ships may now be used in games with fewer than 6 players. And if playing grey, you gain 2 extra credits at the start of the game instead of the normal extra 4. This is because in the base game there were no grey goods, so the grey player never got a tier 1 bonus, but the Capital expansion cards are grey, so now they do. Also during setup, if a Capital card is placed onto a ship at sea, discard it and replace it with another card from the deck. The new Capital cards give you access to a new action, Barter. Each time you perform the barter action, you may swap 1 card from your hand with 1 from the supply island. However, this action is special. If you are the leading player and you declare this action, only you will perform it. The other players cannot follow or even draw. And also, if you have a barter crew card, you can follow any declared action with a barter action. So, for example, if you have 2 barter crew cards and another player declares a load action, you could draw up to 5 cards and then perform the barter action up to twice. Note that unlike the other actions, 2 matching cards may not be used as a barter action. However, 2 barter cards can be used as a wild for any other action. Capital goods count as 1 good of the same type as your leftmost non-capital good. So here for example, your leftmost non-capital good is technology. Therefore your capital goods cards both count as technology cards. In order to play a capital card as a contract, you must meet its tier level requirement as usual. However, these cards have special requirements ranging from 0 to 9. Each stored good you have of any type counts as 1 towards this requirement, and the Grey Harbour counts as 1 tier for playing capital contracts. You can use additional contract actions to skip tier requirements as usual. Some capital cards have load requirements showing a grey container with a question mark. Any colour of container can be loaded to meet this requirement, and the grey containers themselves count as wild containers, meaning that they can fulfill any load requirement colour. However, grey containers cannot be loaded or pirated. The only way to get them onto your ships is by means of special powers. And unlike other cards, you can discard capital cards from your hand at any time, but you do not draw replacements immediately. That will only happen when you draw cards as normal. With the Tokyo expansion, the city of Tokyo is thriving with fresh innovation and unique subcultures. To use this expansion, use the other side of the supply island, which represents the port of Tokyo. When placing a card there, either in setup or when selling a card, place it in its respective column based on the tier level requirement of the card. When taking a card for your crew, you may take any card from any column. When you are performing the contract action, however, you can contract a card from Tokyo instead of from your hand. To do this, you must pay the cost printed at the top of the column that the card is in. You must still meet the tier level requirement as normal. Cards from the Flag expansion have two coloured containers on them and represent two different contracts. When you contract one of these cards, choose which contract you want as the active one, the other one has no effect. These cards have no tier level requirement, but to load one of these as a container, you must first pay 2 credits. Then you choose which of the two types of container it counts as and rotate the card so that the chosen colour is the closest to the ship. If the container is later pirated, it must stay as the same colour. The commodities market adds a level of supply and demand to the game. In setup, place the optional market card next to the supply island and place one of each of the containers on the middle space of each good. These are known as the goods markers. When a good is placed in a player's goods area, move the corresponding good marker one space up for each good placed, up to a maximum of +2. And whenever a contract is fulfilled, the value of each container is modified by the position of the corresponding goods marker. After payout, for each container on the ship, move the corresponding goods marker one space down, to a minimum of -2. For example, this contract is fulfilled. There are 4 containers, so the base payout is 10 credits. However, the mint containers are valued at +1 and the blue containers at -2. Therefore, you only gain 8 credits. The mint and blue goods markers drop by 2 spaces each, but blue doesn't move as it's already at the bottom. I hope you found this video useful in learning how to play Import-Export and the expansions. Thank you to Jordan Draper Games for helping to sponsor this video, and if you're interested in picking up the game, you can do so from Jordan's website, jordandraper.com/shop. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment if you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions about the game, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And if you like the videos that I create and want to support the channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Until next time, take care, and thanks for watching. Gaming Rules is proudly sponsored by Game Toppers, upgrading your gaming experience. Visit GameToppers